All right, we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Jim Lucy. I'm a product manager on the Exchange team out of Redmond. I actually grew up 4 hours north of here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and something yesterday brought me back, made it feel like home. And when the snacks got brought out here, they actually had moon pies out there. How many of you have seen the moon pies or tried a moon pie? Yeah, not too healthy, but they do remind me of home, and I had to take a picture of eating a moon pie and put it up on Facebook to share with all my friends. Anyway, I'm going to talk about Exchange Server and Exchange Online and how to set up a hybrid deployment. Just a show of hands, actually, hold up, I'll save that. I just want to give a little bit of background and then ask this question in just a moment. What I plan to go through here, talking about the hybrid features themselves, all the components involved in setting up a hybrid deployment, some of the planning requirements, going through what are all the deployment stages from the online 365 side, the Office 365 side, and on the Exchange on-premises side. And then also, Greg Taylor presented on, was it Monday? Yeah, on Monday on Exchange 2010 SP2. We posted a blog yesterday on all the features coming out, and one of the features that are coming in 2010 SP2 is the hybrid configuration wizard. So I will be touching a bit on that. The session, I will be talking about what is available today when Office 365 releases, and then kind of summarize it at the end and explain all the things that we're simplifying in SP2. So with that, first I wanted to really just pose the question, when you're planning for a deployment and migrating to Office 365 or Exchange Online, what are all the things that that come into play in deciding how to move, when to move, what to move, things like that. So the first question, and by the way, all these questions when you subscribe or you get your Office 365 account and you set up the deployment, it's going to go through and ask you a lot of these questions too to direct you to the right migration path. But the first thing is, what's the size of your organization? If you have a 10 to 150, 200 users, you could probably migrate in just a few hours. And so you don't need to do a lot of the configuration things from that perspective. But if you're a larger organization, 2,000 mailboxes is enough. There's a bit more that you need to take into account. Also, the size of the organization is going to come into play from a throughput scenario. As you're moving mailboxes to the cloud, it just doesn't happen. I know a lot of large organizations that are moving or upgrading from like 2003 or 2007 to 2010, they do these deployments over months and plan for them and make them happen in an organized, thought-out scenario. So moving to the cloud, it's not like you could just expect all of a sudden my thousands of mailboxes move right overnight. We do a bit of throttling on our side so that the onboarding of users doesn't affect client performance that's in the cloud already. And then also, you're going to have to take into account network bandwidth constraints outside of our control. So from a size perspective, that's important. Other things, what is the source email system that you're coming from? Is it Exchange Server? Okay, if it's 2003 versus 2007, there's going to be different requirements. If it's going to come from Notes or Google or GroupWise, or just another IMAP server, there's different options from a migration standpoint available to you. Some organizations that are going to provision, they may have line of business apps on-prem, and they have their own Active Directory that they're managing. There's DirSync requirements, so they have a unified GAL. There's identity management requirements, single sign-on. If you have those line of business apps and you want to sign on one time and be able to get to your online services as well as your on-premises products, that you could do that. And then finally, this term called hybrid. being able to share calendar and free busy information between your on-prem environment and your online environment. So again, a lot of things to bring into play when you're planning. And so I titled the slide, "Can I do it in a weekend?" and is really dependent on a lot of these factors. So what we've done for Office 365, we built some migration capabilities right out of the service. And I'm going to cover the first three fairly quickly here. We have an IMAP migration tool that is a web-based migration tool. There's nothing required on-premises to do this migration, no servers deployed on-prem to make it go to the cloud. IMAP can come from any email system that supports the IMAP protocol. So it's fairly generic in that respect. One constraint is we do email only. We don't do calendar, contacts, tasks. Not even sure if those IMAP servers have those features available. But as we look, this is the only option that we have to support non-Exchange systems. So if you're looking for a richer experience moving to Office 365 where you need more than just the email and you have other requirements maybe from a hybrid perspective, that you'll want to look at some of our partners. They're going to do a much better job designing their products that actually fit the needs of the needs of organizations that way. If we built it, we'd build a fairly general tool that would work for everybody, but they're going to build their tools for specific needs. And I encourage you to go by the Binary Tree, Quest, BitTitan Boost. Those are three partners that we definitely work with. I'm sure there's others in there as well. But those partners definitely are working on migration tools to Office 365. The next option that we have is called cutover Exchange migration. And by the way, if you've seen a similar presentation in the past, you might have seen terms like simple Exchange migration, simple coexistence, things like that, or rich coexistence. We've kind of changed the names because we feel that these names that we have here actually resonate and fit better with what the customer is actually trying to do. So with cutover Exchange migration, it's more about the small customer, under 200 mailboxes, that really is just looking to move to the cloud to just get there right away. They're on Exchange 2003 or 2007 or 2010 today, and they don't have that many users, and they just want to move to the cloud. It's a web-based migration tool. There's no servers need to be built or configured on premises to get that going. Quick cutover. The next one is a staged Exchange migration. And this one's going to be more for organizations that aren't going to cut over or don't need to cut or don't want to cut over in a few hours, that it's going to take them maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month to migrate over, or maybe a tad bit longer than that, where they are going to have users in two different places. You'll set up directory synchronization, so you'll have a unified GAL, things like that. But again, we have staged migration there. I don't plan to go into any more detail on those. There's a session tomorrow that Ram is delivering on. It's called Simple Exchange Migration Live, I believe. And so he's going to go into more detail on the IMAP cutover, staged exchange migration, and kind of the architecture and how things are actually moved. What I plan to talk about is the hybrid deployment scenario. This is the scenario where you're going to have organization that's going to take a much longer time to migrate. They've got thousands of users, and it's going to take maybe months, could be longer, could be a year, however long it takes that organization, however they want it, where they're able to maintain users in both the on-prem environment and Exchange Online, and maintain a set of rich coexistence or hybrid technology with those users, like calendar sharing, free busy. Maybe they have their archive in the online location, things like that. This is going to require a bit more configuration by the IT administrator up front to make the experience happen, but it'll provide a smooth transition for the end users. They won't know whether they're on premises or in the cloud. Their mailboxes will move up, And if they need to be off-boarded, maybe they move to a different part of the company that's maintained in an on-premises environment, they could be smoothly moved back on-prem. Now, we do see a scenario like in the education space where they might maintain a permanent state of hybrid, where they have their students in online and Office 365 or Live at EDU in free mailboxes or low-cost mailboxes, and they'll keep their faculty and staff on-premise indefinitely. And so maintaining it that way. Maybe on a financial securities firm, from a compliance perspective, they have users online, but if the analyst or someone leaves the company or is fired or something, and they need to retain all their email for some period of time, instead of paying the subscription license online, they want to move that mailbox on-prem to an Exchange environment or an archive locally. So this is where I'll stop and ask the question. How many of you are in the process and looking at the hybrid scenario as a logical step to moving to the cloud? Okay. I also like to see the hands for those that think they'd be in a permanent state of coexistence forever. Wow. Okay. Cool. That was more hands than I thought I'd get. So I'm going to spend the rest of the session talking about some of the features and the configuration that's required there. Now, with the hybrid-specific deployment, I have the columns here for staged and hybrid because they're most similar in going longer than a cutover period and the features required. Today's session is strictly on the hybrid scenario. And with hybrid, I'm going to group this table into different feature sets. So when we talk about Exchange Federation or Exchange sharing, I'm talking about these features that, from an end user perspective, they're able to see whether they're on-prem, online, and between each other. So we have FreeBusy information that we're sharing, mail tips, OWA redirection. You could have your mailbox on premises, but have your Exchange Online archive in Office 365 and have it that way. So those are the Exchange sharing features. I'll get into more detail on all of these. We have mailbox move features that we'll be configuring. So we use MRS, the Mailbox Replication Service. So when we're configured for a hybrid deployment, you'll be able to move mailboxes online, a great new benefit for Exchange 2010, where it's an actual online move mailbox. The mailbox will be online. Users will still be able to connect, send, receive emails as they're being moved to Office 365. And if they're off-boarded back on-prem, it's the same scenario. And also, we do a bit of work to allow I'm sorry, I'll take questions at the end, but to allow reconfiguration of the OST file. You don't have to set up a new profile. So when the user is moved online, they don't have to do any reconfiguration of their clients. Big benefit of setting up for hybrid. If they did the other scenarios, they obviously wouldn't get that, and there would be resync scenarios needed. The next area is setting up for secure transport. So in this, obviously, you want, in a hybrid scenario, the users on premises in the cloud to be as one organization. And so as such, you want to have encrypted email communications between those users. You want to maintain the auth headers, things like that, to be able to see those users as internal to the organization, whether they're on-prem or the cloud. Now, the one row that is not highlighted in here, the Exchange Management Console, there's appendix slides that I'm not going to get to, but because this is going to be on the deployment configuration. But if you guys want to reference the slides, it's like after you're all set up and configured, what does the EMC look like? You can use EMC. It'll have a node for the on-prem environment. It'll have a tree node for the online environment. And you can use EMC to move mailboxes to the cloud and back and manage those users there. Okay. Now, I'm going to step through each of the features just a little bit just to give you some perspective. So calendar sharing and FreeBusy, when we're talking about a hybrid scenario where these users are coexisting and moving between organizations. I hear FreeBusy and calendar sharing as being critical to an organization from a coexistence perspective. Like, I think of a healthcare industry where you have doctors where their calendars are full of appointments with patients, you know? A doctor does not want to lose that meeting request or be able to see the other doctor's calendar that he's supposed to meet with about an oncology patient and their cancer treatment. So having a rich calendar sharing and FreeBusy between these organizations is important. In this particular graphic, this graphic shows that there is no hybrid set up at this point and what it would look like. Richard has added Sally. Sally is in the cloud, and he cannot see her FreeBusy information at all. But when we set up for a hybrid scenario, her calendar is actually, you know, there's no meeting scheduled for her, but he can actually see her calendar at that point when we do configure for hybrid. When we talk about mail tips, new feature in Exchange 2010 that gives end users a clue to make a better decision before they send the message, whether they should be sending the message. And we have this great mail tip that says, hey, you're about to send a message to a user that's outside the organization. In case it was sensitive information, it'll give you the ability to think twice about that. In this particular graphic, hybrid is not set up for this environment. And so Richard sees Sally as external to the organization. She's in the cloud. He's on premises. But when we do set it up, the auth header is maintained, and therefore Richard's able to see Sally as an internal user in the overall Contoso organization. When we talk about message tracking, another new feature in Exchange 2010 allows end users the ability to track messages themselves instead of having to call the help desk to have the administrator check. So they're able to see if a message was actually delivered. Now, if there is no hybrid configuration, or hybrid is not configured between on-prem and online, that Richard's message tracking would show as far as it can see, and that's the perimeter of the Exchange on-premises environment. So it's hard to see, but the message tracking description says the message was successfully handed off to a different email system, and this is as far as we can track it. So what we do is set up for hybrid, and now when he goes and sees the message tracking information, it says that message was successfully delivered to Sally's mailbox. Again, I mean, there's a lot of features involved here in hybrid, but we want to make the end user experience seem as on parity as possible to on-premises and if they were in the same organization. Okay, mailbox search, another new feature in Exchange Server 2010, giving an administrator or compliance officer the ability to search across mailboxes. When we set up for, if we did not have hybrid configured, the picker list for choosing mailboxes to search would only show the users in that specific environment, that specific domain. But now what we've done is when we set up for hybrid, that Sally, who is actually in the cloud, now will show up in here. And she shows up a little bit differently than the on-premises user, giving the compliance officer or administrator the ability to differentiate between cloud-hosted mailboxes. Another feature, almost done here, by the way. Another feature is the OA redirection. So think of the scenario where I have my mailbox on-prem and I have my OA URL that I'm used to using. I probably would put it in my favorites so that I can quickly go back to it at a moment's notice. If we didn't have this feature and you move the person's mailbox online, there's a new OA URL, and no longer their favorite in IE or whatever browser no longer works, and so have to call the help desk. What we've done is work to ensure a good user experience, whether they're moved on-prem or in the cloud, where we can point the OA URL to the on-premises environment and it'll redirect automatically to online as needed. So we can create just do the OA redirection there, simplifying the logon experience. Mail flow, fairly important. And so I was talking about before how we maintain the auth headers in a hybrid environment. So in this particular case, this specific email properties page has the SMTP address of Sally. So when Richard brought up Sally's information, it was as if Sally was an external user and just shows the SMTP address. When we do set up for hybrid scenario, it brings the auth headers and treats those users as internal to that organization. And therefore, Richard's able to see Sally's full Outlook properties page, address, company, title, phone number, all that good stuff. So just a quick summary. Setting up for hybrid, fairly important to maintaining a very great end user experience, whether they're on premises, in the cloud, move back and forth, whatever the case may be. There's near parity experience between features on-prem and in the cloud, and we want that the migrations to be transparent to the end user. You know, they're still able to send and receive email, and they still have the great experience from Outlook, OA, and their mobile devices, no matter if they're on-prem or in the cloud. Now, with that said, the point of this slide that I really wanted to call out is there's some features that don't work cross-premises or don't work quite right. And all these we acknowledge and we're working on. But for example, delegate permissions. So if I'm an executive in the company and I have an administrative assistant, I've delegated access to my mailbox. If the executive is moved online and the administrative assistant is left on-prem, that delegate information, although it goes with the mailbox to the cloud, it's no longer going to work because they are technically in two different environments. So organizations or administrators will want to move those delegators and delegatees in tandem to the cloud. Migration of send as and full access permissions, generally the same kind of issues that are involved there. Multi-forest scenario, there's a lot of organizations that have multiple forests in their on-premises environment. And right now we don't support multiple forests in the cloud. And so the only recourse for organizations is to move to a single forest, which is fairly painful. But also we acknowledge this, and actually we're looking at scenarios to help bring those multiple forests to treat and make it think they're one for Office 365. And so while that's not going to be there in the time frame that we go live with Office 365, we hope to have something not too far off in the future, and we'll keep communicating to you guys as that's ready. Public folders. How many of you use Exchange public folders? Okay, they're not supported in Office 365. We don't have them there. We do know that's a blocker for some organizations. Yeah, that's all I got to say. No. With that said, I personally am writing a white paper that hopefully will be out in the next month on how to migrate your Exchange public folders to Office 365. And while we don't have public folders in the cloud, there are specific scenarios where public folders are used that there's much better technology or the right technology to use. So shared mailboxes, SharePoint document libraries, you know, if you're using it for calendar sharing or contact sharing, you know, SharePoint's a much better thing for that. Distribution group archive. Anyway, this white paper will go through the pros and cons of different ways to use it, and you can decide for yourself which way you want to go. But I thought it was important to go through and talk about some of the unsupported features in Office 365 to give you a perspective. Now, I want to go through and start getting a little deeper here, talk about some of the planning and concepts, and then some of the configuration aspects to this. So on premises, there are two specific server roles required. You need the Office 365 Active Directory synchronization to occur, so have a server for that. or a role for that. And that's going to help give you the unified GAL between your users on-prem and online. If a user's created on premises and they're migrated to the cloud, it's literally going to just create a contact for that user in the on-prem environment and redirect them to the cloud. I'll get a little more into that in a bit. Also, Exchange 2010 SP1 CAS or Hub, CAS and Hub role is required for on-premises. Now, if you have 2003, you'll also want to add the MBX, the mailbox role, because FreeBSD information was stored in public folders in 2003, so adding the mailbox role will help convert that over to something that we can share with the online service. So anyway, the 2010 SP1 CAS and Hub role is required. Optional is the Active Directory Federation services. I say this as optional, and this is if you want single sign-on. I say this as optional because you technically don't need single sign-on, but I don't think we've talked to too many customers that don't want single sign-on, so we anticipate all customers will have some kind of single sign-on architecture for between their on-premises and online environments. Now, I think the question might be, I'm on 2003 or 2007 today, we've decided we're moving to the cloud, but it's going to take us a while and we're going to have a hybrid environment in that process. Does that mean I have to purchase Exchange 2010 and deploy it on premises? Yes, you have to deploy it on premises, but the answer is no, you do not have to purchase it, because we're going to have at general availability of Office 365 for paid subscriptions to Exchange Online, you'll get a free license key for a hybrid edition of Exchange 2010 SP1 to help with that. So if there was any concern about the cost of migrating from a licensing perspective, hopefully we've removed that a little bit from that discussion. Okay, getting into talking about namespaces. So basic, just at a high level, talking about single namespace here. This is an on-premises only Exchange environment. They have their MX record set as contoso.com. And we have a user in the internet, Joe at foo.com, who's going to send a message to Ben at contoso.com. Fairly simple. The message is routed. The MX record points it, knows where it's going, and it points it to the Exchange servers on premises, and the message is delivered to Ben's mailbox. No magic tricks there. Now, when we talk about a shared namespace, we see that organizations that are going to have some mailboxes on-prem and some in the cloud, they're two separate domains technically, but they do want a single namespace. So they want all users in the organization to be considered contoso.com. In this particular case, Joe's going to send a message to Ben. His mailbox is actually in the online environment. So what's going to happen? The message is delivered on-prem to Ben at contoso.com, but that's a contact, and we see that that mailbox is actually in the cloud at service.contoso.com, and so the message is forwarded direct to his mailbox. Fairly straightforward. Now we jump to another concept here in the planning of the hybrid scenario, talking about federation. And there's two types of federation that we see from Exchange. There's identity federation, and really looking at single sign-on scenarios using ADFS 2.0. And this is really going to handle your logons to local line of business apps and do single sign-on to your Exchange Online environment. And that area of identity really pertains to all of the Office 365 services, SharePoint, Link, and Exchange equally. So when you're configuring that, you're configuring it for all the services in Office 365. Now on the Exchange side of the fence, we have Exchange Federation or Exchange Sharing. And this is what enables all the features that I went through at the beginning of this session, the FreeBSD and calendar sharing, setting up mail tips, doing message tracking, and cross-mailbox search. And so this specific scenario is for hybrid Exchange Online deployments. Now, I just want to get into some of the architecture and talk about how these federated features actually work. And I'm going to start with very basic, I started with a single namespace before and went to shared namespace. I'm going to show how FreeBSY works in just a normal on-premises Exchange environment. In this particular case, when Ben looks up FreeBSY for another user, he's requesting the FreeBSY information for Brad from the CAS server. The CAS goes to the mailbox server, resolves that request, and then the FreeBSY information is returned by CAS directly to the Outlook client. All that heavy lifting is done by the CAS server and the mailbox server in this case. Now, when we look at federated FreeBSY scenario, where we have users in the cloud, Joe's mailbox is in the cloud in this particular case. Same thing happens. Ben's going to request Joe's information. What's going to happen is the CAS server is going to see that Joe is external to the organization and that there is an organization relationship set up. I'll get more into what an organization relationship is and how to configure that later. But it sees that there is an organization relationship set up. So it goes out to the Microsoft Federation Gateway. First, dabble into the MFG. The MFG CAS requests that token, and the MFG returns that token back to the CAS server. The CAS server then appends on the actual FreeBSY request on behalf of Ben and requests Exchange Online, and then the CAS server is returned the information on-prem, and then again, Ben's Outlook client just sees the FreeBSY information. Nothing is done by Outlook in this case. It's all done on the server side. Now, the other feature, talking about Exchange Archive, Exchange Online Archive, this is the case where Ben's mailbox is on premises and his archive mailbox is actually in the cloud. If you went and saw the session this morning on archiving, then they might have touched on this a little bit. This might be a little overview rehash, but again, Ben requests from the client access server for access to his online archive. Again, he sees that Ben's external to the organization and it's held in Exchange Online, and the request is sent to the Microsoft Federation Gateway for that token. And the token is returned to the CAS server. Works very much similar to FreeBSY. The request is attached on behalf of Ben to see his own online archive. And then that archive hierarchy is returned to the CAS server and then rendered in Ben's Outlook client. Again, all the heavy lifting done by the server and not by the client. Okay, so switching from that federation scenario and jumping a little bit to transport. Looking at secure transport, you definitely want to set up an environment where email is encrypted and considered as everyone in the organization is seen as in the same organization and treated that way. I talked about the features where you can bring up the Outlook properties, where you see the full Outlook properties for those users, and so that's what we'll get into here. So in this case, transport layer security. Just a little background on what transport layer security is and how to set that up. So we have our on-premises environment where we have on the hub transport server, a certificate subject is mail.contoso.com. And we have the certificate subject in Forefront Online Protection is mail.messaging.microsoft.com. So in this case, configuring TLS such that the on-prem and Forefront environment only send and receive messages using that certificate, we configure an encrypted connection where it's authenticated in this case. And so that gives us our TLS connection, and in old world terms, that we call this domain secure. So that's the base point of configuring for our secure mail environment. Now, assuming that we have our TLS connection set up between on-prem and the cloud, we need to think about what it means by sending the internal headers to the cloud, which gives us that feature of being able to see the full Outlook properties page and other internal header information that comes across. So in this case, Ben is going to actually send a message to Joe in the cloud. A message is routed to the Hub Transport server. It sees that that message is destined for online, so it just attaches the internal headers to the message. So we see the cross-org email data is added on there. Now, Forefront Online Protection for Exchange is the endpoint for this TLS connection. You know, it sees that it's coming from over there, so it just attaches the certificate subject to that information and then routes that to essentially the transport server in Exchange Online. It sees that the certificate subjects match, and so it just promotes that internal header information for that email and routes it to Joe's mailbox. So in this particular case, that email is authenticated as internal between those users. And if Joe brought up the properties of Ben's mailbox, you'd see the full Outlook properties. Now, looking at it the reverse way, it works basically the same. Joe sends the message. Exchange Online sees that it's destined to external, and it attaches the internal header information. No need to worry about Forefront in this case. It's the same organization on the online side. It routes it right to the Hub Transport server, which is the endpoint of the TLS connection. And it sees that the certificate subjects match, and it promotes the internal header information and considers this email as authenticated and internal. Another concept is centralized mail flow. So this is the scenario where an organization wants all their mail routed through the Hub Transport servers in their on-premises environment. So they don't have messages coming in the cloud and on-prem, that it goes through one place and they're able to really act on those messages and control them a little bit better. So as before, we have our TLS connection set up between on-prem and Forefront. And in this case, we just set connectors on the cloud side so that it only sends messages to on-prem and only receives messages to on-prem, basically using an address space of asterisk. So in this, essentially, just blocks all messages coming from the internet to Forefront. So they're all routed completely through on-prem. Now, we do know there's scenarios where organizations want to route messages through Forefront Online Protection for Exchange and then maybe down to their on-prem environment and things like that. They want Forefront to be the entry point to their organization. And we're working on content and configuration scenarios for that as well, but don't have that here today. Okay. Okay, now talking about deployment specifically. So we have this really great deployment assistant that the Exchange teams built. It's at technet.microsoft.com, WAC EXDeploy 2010. And essentially, at the very beginning, it just asks, is this an on-premises only deployment? And if you choose that, it takes you to content that we've had since we launched Exchange 2010. It'll build the administrator literally a deployment guide tailored specifically to their organization, whether they're migrating from 2003 or 2007, or maybe a combination of 2003 and 2007. We just added this middle part where it says coexistence. We're actually in the process of changing that to, say, hybrid. But when we choose hybrid, it'll ask, are you coming from 2003 or are you coming from 2007? The 2007 content just got added, I think, like a week or two ago, so it's fairly new. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend going up there and checking it out. All the things that I'm talking about here, it will go into greater detail on how to configure those things and why to configure those things. Auto-discover, secure transport, federated trusts, organization sharing, all those things are pretty well documented in there. So this information, the 2010 content, if you're migrating or setting up hybrid between 2010 and Exchange Online, that should be available there by general availability of Office 365. Okay, Now, when we look at the actual deployment and configuration of this hybrid scenario, we kind of break it up into a couple steps here. On the Office 365 side, there's things that need to be done. And then on the Exchange side, there's a few things that need to be done. These are fairly generalized and not click by click through all the configuration things. So first, a required step is to register any SMTP domains that you have or need. So register them with Office 365. Anything I have here recommended for the federated identity setup. If you do want single sign-on, which you probably do want single sign-on, you'll need to set up an ADFS server and then set up that identity with Office 365. Next, required step, DirSync is required to maintain a unified global address list, so you'll need to set up that. And then also a little thing not required but probably recommended is this little tick box for configuring for write-back, DirSync write-back. And this is if you're going to offboard users off Office 365 back to on-prem, that there's message replyability with their emails and things like that. On the Exchange side of things, the Exchange configuration steps, a few more here. I talked about the requirements to have the CAS hub role for 2010 SP1 installed on premises, so you'll need to do that. And if it's coming from 2003, you'll also want the mailbox role as well added to that. You'll need to configure your DNS records for AutoDiscover. So setting up your Contoso, autodiscover.contoso.com to point to autodiscover.service or autodiscover.outlook.com in the cloud, which is how we do the AutoDiscover there. Publishing the MRS proxy, and it literally is just a checkbox to enable MRS proxy, and this is what's going to help allow to do the online move with the mailbox replication service. Now, when we move from mailboxes from on-prem to on-cloud to the cloud, there are things that don't go over there that you'll need to. You don't have to create these on the cloud side, but you probably want to, and those are policies that you've enabled for those mailboxes. If they have any ActiveSync policies, if you've required a PIN for their ActiveSync connection, you'll probably want that PIN requirement for ActiveSync on the cloud mailbox as well. So anyway, just a number of policy settings and things like that, OWA policies, ActiveSync policies. In addition, RBAC. You will maintain basic RBAC capabilities if you're using the default roles and things like that. But if you've done anything with role-based access control to manipulate the built-in roles, like you've taken the discovery management capability and removed the legal hold task assigned to that, you'll probably need to do that in the cloud as well and assign that user that policy, that RBAC role. On premises, and this is in the Exchange Management Console, you'll need to run the new federated trust wizard, literally to set up the federated trust between your on-prem environment and the Federation Gateway. You'll also need to set up those org relationships, and they're reciprocal. You'll need to set up an org relationship from on-prem to online, and you also reciprocally set up the on-prem federated trust to on-prem. And this is all done in the Exchange Management Console. Just click on in the tree on the Exchange on-prem hierarchy object, and literally it's new organization relationship. And then you'll need to configure the cross-premises mail routing. So I'm going to get into a little bit more on the Federation Trust, the org relationship, and the mail routing on the next few slides. So creating those federated trusts, again, it's in the Exchange Management Console. You're just creating a trust using a unique namespace. In this case, it says exchangedelegation.contoso.com to the Microsoft Federation Gateway. And you don't have to do that between Exchange Online and the MFG. That's just assumed when you get your Exchange Online tenant. From an organization relationship perspective, you run the organization relationship wizard in the Exchange Management Console and literally create in the on-premises node a trust with a relationship with service.contoso.com in the cloud. And then again in the EMC, you'll go to the online node in the tree and create a new organization relationship from online to the on-premises environment, contoso.com. Now we've done a bit in SP2, which I'm going to get to in just a minute on this particular slide, and I'll just rehash it in a moment. So we've done a bit to not require this specific unique namespace, exchangedelegation.contoso.com in Service Pack 2. We've actually opened that up and made that a lot simpler to organizations. At the same time, when you have an Exchange Online environment, you no longer have to point to service.contoso.com. I believe that when you create your online account and you set up this configuration, we're going to configure it for you with a very specific domain, and I'll point to that in an upcoming slide. So you no longer have to do that, and it just makes the configuration for you. You don't need to set up auto-discover anymore, set up your DNS records. We're just going to do that for you. Creating secure mail connectors. I talked about how the mail flowed, setting up TLS, and how secure mail is going to flow. Just from a configuration standpoint, what you'll want to look at. On the Exchange side, you want to create a send connector where it'll only send messages to Exchange Online in this case. And then on the FOPI side, you want to set up an inbound connector where it'll only receive messages from the on-premises environment. Likewise, you're going to set up an outbound connector on FOPI, so it'll only send messages to the on-prem environment. And then a receive connector in Exchange on-prem where it'll only receive messages from FOPI. So again, that's just going to set up our centralized mail flow scenario where it'll just flow right through our organization this way. And again, setting up remote domains, they define the usage of the internal headers information. Now coming to what's new in SP2, I don't have any UI or anything to show at this moment because some of the graphics actually were developing SP2. They have a little bit of Latin and some of the things I didn't think it was appropriate to throw up stuff with a bunch of incorrect spellings on them. Like I think in one UI the word message was massage, so I was like, okay, probably inappropriate. But anyway, the new hybrid configuration wizard is literally going to be in the EMC at the high-level node. You're just like you're doing a new federated trust or a new organization relationship, you're going to choose new hybrid wizard, new hybrid configuration wizard. And it's going to step you through a lot of the things that I just went through. It's going to set up the federated trust for you. It's going to set up the org relationships, your accepted domains, your email address policies, your send-receive connectors. I mean, everything that's on this list that requires clicks on your behalf, we're going to do a lot of that for you automatically. And we knew that there was a lot of clicks, and we knew we needed to make this quite a bit better. So we're still kind of looking at all the stuff that we're able to do, but we see general steps. This is not the number of clicks. That would be a lot more here. But 50 general steps to the most complicated configuration, the wizard actually takes that down to only 6 manual steps. So we've taken a lot of the burden off you guys. So as you're thinking about moving and setting up a hybrid deployment for Office 365, you could do this when we go live with Office 365 GA. You could do a lot of the things that I showed you here manually, and when we release SP2, it's just going to get a heck of a lot easier for you. Excuse me? So Service Pack 2 is scheduled for the second half of this year. Yeah. And we just blogged about it yesterday, so if you go to the msexchangeteam.com blog, you'll see a little bit more information about this and the other features that are coming in there. With the new hybrid configuration wizard, we actually have new PowerShell commandlets associated with them. So new, get, set, and update are the general actions, and the commandlet is hybrid configuration. I alluded to some of the namespace improvements on a previous slide. So for when you're setting up a new federated trust, how is exchangedelegation.contoso.com, you no longer have to set up that specific domain or namespace. That it doesn't have to be a unique namespace in that case anymore. And then also when you set up, when you're doing the organization relationships and you have the service.contoso.com or service.company.com that were required before, we're taking that away as well in this hybrid environment. And it says it here. It's going to be company.mail.onmicrosoft.com that we provide for you and configure the auto-discover DNS entries and things like that for you on your behalf, taking away quite a few steps from the manual process. So I just ran through that deck fairly quickly. Anyway, just a review of what I went through here. I went through some of the migration capabilities. You'll see a little bit more in ROM session tomorrow on the IMAP, the cutover exchange migration and the staged exchange migration. Talked about some of the sharing features and what's involved in setting up secure transport, the namespace and certificate requirements in configuring for hybrid. And then, honestly, setting up for a hybrid makes sense if you're an organization that's going to take time to move to the cloud or remain in some hybrid form of hybrid scenario for an indefinite period of time, that you make it easy for your end users. Having the calendar sharing free busy and things like that, it's just going to make your life easier. So anyway, thank you very much.